Welcome to the Reading for Wellbeing podcast. I'm your host, Professor Pozzulo. Today I'm talking with Dr. Robert Coplan, author of The Joy of Solitude, How to Reconnect with Yourself in an Overconnected World. Welcome, Dr. Coplan.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Full disclosure, you and I are colleagues in the Department of Psychology at Carleton University, so this is a real treat to get to interview you about your latest book. Before we start talking about The Joy of Solitude, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how did you get interested in researching solitude?
Sure. So I grew up in Montreal, and I started my psychology career as an undergraduate student at McGill University. And then I went on to do my graduate work, my master's and my PhD at the University of Waterloo. And then right after I finished, I started in the Department of Psychology here at Carleton 31 years ago. This is my 31st year in the department. So definitely it's been a while, that's for sure. And at the beginning of my career, I was mostly interested in the development of shyness and social anxiety and social withdrawal in kids. And so I spent a lot of time, watching kids. We went to schools, we were preschools and schoolyards and just places where kids would gather, particularly younger kids. And we were particularly interested in these shy children who tended to be kind of off by themselves. They were watching other kids, but they weren't joining in. They, looking a little bit nervous, but still kind of interested in playing. And after spending all of that time watching these shy kids, we also tended to notice there were these other kids who were also off by themselves, but they didn't really seem to mind. They kind of enjoyed it. They were building with blocks, or they were reading a book or doing a puzzle. And if, someone came along and invited them to play, they were like, sure, I'll go and play. And they played for a while and they were done. They went back and seemed content to play by themselves. And that got me really interested in sort of what it's like to enjoy spending time alone. And over the years, that has expanded to looking at the costs and benefits of solitude, across the whole lifespan.
Great. You mentioned in your book that not everybody agrees on what solitude actually is. Can you define that a little bit? And also this really unique term called aloneliness. And fun fact, I believe it was a response to a question on Jeopardy a few years back.
Sure. So let me tell you the sort of the origin of that term and also sort of our definitions of solitude. So for something that seems like it should be relatively objective and straightforward, it turns out there are quite a few different definitions and approaches to what solitude is. Some people focus on solitude as like a physical separation from others, like, walking in the forest by yourself, or teenager alone in their room with the door closed. Others are more about this perceived separation. So, sitting in a coffee shop with your headset on, reading, but not really paying attention to what anywhere else. So that's kind of like being alone in a crowd. I kind of like the definition that was suggested by a sociologist named Goffman in the 1960s, I think it was. He used the metaphor of the stage. And so for him, when we're with other people, we are on stage. We're, under the spotlight, and we have an audience. And so we've got to pay attention to what we say, our posture, our facial expression. And we're really on the lookout for what everyone else is saying and their reactions. And that can be stressful. And some people find that very, stressful and very, self-conscious making. And for him, solitude is what happened when you step off stage and when you step out of the spotlight. And it's just, I think, a nice metaphor for the break that you get, the respite from those kinds of pressures, and a chance to just take a big exhale and not have to worry about what everyone else is thinking about what you are doing.
Right. Amazing. Can you talk a little bit about what are the benefits of spending time by yourself?
Yeah. So I guess one distinction that we should make, and I feel like I didn't answer your whole question from the last one, was the distinction between solitude and loneliness. And of course, loneliness is awful. Loneliness is something that we should be paying attention to. A lot of people say to me, do you think because you focus on the positive aspects of solitude, are we like overplaying the damaging impact of loneliness? Is there really such a thing as a loneliness epidemic? And I have to be really clear, just because I'm talking about the positive aspects of solitude, I never want to be interpreted as saying that loneliness is not a real problem. Loneliness is a huge problem. And it's really, it's a bad feeling that we get when we are not satisfied with our social life, right? It's a discrepancy between how much time we want to with others, the quality of that time, and what we actually do. And when it doesn't meet our expectations, when it doesn't meet our need to belong, our need to be with other people, we get this bad feeling called loneliness. And loneliness it's just awful. It can impact upon our well-being and our mental health and even our physical health. And so it's something that we really should pay attention to. But of course, loneliness is not solitude. You can feel lonely even when you're in a group of people. You can go to a party, not interact with a lot of people, spend the whole night watching others, and lead even more lonely than when you got there. And of course, you can be in solitude and not feel lonely at all.
Mhm.
So loneliness is a bad feeling. Solitude for me is a place. And it's a place, particularly if we choose to go there, where we can get some of these benefits. And these benefits can be, taking the edge off of our negative emotions. It's a chance to, have a respite from these social stresses. It's a chance to recharge our battery. It's a chance to allow us to reflect and to self-discover. And for me, it's an incubator for creativity and problem solving.
Yeah, I really like and appreciate that you made the distinction between loneliness and solitude. And so, great example that you can be in a room with a lot of other people and still feel lonely. And but you can be by yourself and really enjoy that time and not feel lonely at all. Can you talk a little bit about so let's say you are spending time by yourself. Are there certain activities that may make that time more beneficial for our well-being?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think there's a lot of myths about that. So I think there's this idea out there that in order to reap the benefits of solitude, in order to really experience all the good stuff that we just sort of, briefly mentioned, that you have to, put out a yoga mat and fold your legs and meditate. And don't get me wrong, meditation is awesome and it has a lot of positive benefits for our well-being and our health, and people should meditate, but it's not for everybody. And also, it turns out that you don't have to meditate to get the benefits of solitude. It turns out there's actually a lot of different things that you can do that will help you, experience some of the positive aspects of being by yourself. And the most important characteristic of what you do is it's something that's important to you. It's something that's meaningful to you. It's something that you choose, something that you find engaging, enjoyable. And so it's a wide range of activities. For some people, it might be taking a walk in the woods. For some people, it might be reading a book, might be knitting, might be watching videos, it might be playing Candy Crush on your phone. It really is almost anything goes as long as you are doing something that you are personally finding engaging. And since I mentioned your phone, I guess I should say it's probably not a good idea to scroll social media maybe when you're by yourself, because we know that's not really good for you under any circumstances. And maybe turn off your notifications so that, your phone doesn't interrupt your solitude and constantly pester you for your attention. But aside from that, really, I don't think we need to get too hung up on what we do when we're alone. Just find something that works for you. You do you, as I like to say, when it comes to solitude. And that will usually work for giving us some of the benefits.
That's great. Is there a certain amount of time that we should be spending alone each day, or how does that work? How much time is kind of like the optimal amount of time, if there's such a thing?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said if there's such a thing at the end, because for me, I'm always very suspicious when people are trying to give us advice about the exact amount of time or hours that we need per day or per week to interact with others and to be by ourselves. Humans need social connection. We all need to hang out with other people. Humans also need solitude, I would argue. We also need our time alone. But the exact amount of those, and here's the critical part, is really, what's going to make you feel good, what's going to be best for your well-being is different for everyone. And here's where the Goldilocks principle comes in, right? So we know from the fairy tale of Goldilocks that, sometimes the porridge is too hot and sometimes the porridge is too cold. But what you got to find is that just right temperature for the porridge that's going to make you enjoy it the most. And it works for me exactly the same way for how much time we spend with others and how much time we spend alone. There's this just right balance that is separate for everyone. It's unique for everyone. That's going to allow us to kind of maximize well-being by going back and forth. And that kind of balance is important because, for some people, it's a push to spend a little bit more time around with others. And for some other people, it's a push to spend a little bit more time alone. But everybody needs some of both, but the exact balance of both, the right combination that's going to make you feel the best, that's going to be the best for your well-being is absolutely personal to you.
Yeah. One study that you mentioned in your book, which I thought was fascinating, was around COVID and how people were having to spend so much time alone. And a lot of people thought, oh, this was going to be great for, introverts. And it turned out that that wasn't the case. Can you talk a little bit about that study and how forced time alone is not necessarily ideal either?
Right. So you mentioned a few things that are kind of important there. One of them is around choice. And so we definitely know that chosen solitude has the best chance of giving us positive outcomes and being experienced the most positively. So when you choose to spend time alone, when you make it part of your schedule, when you kind of book some me time in there, that's when you have the best chance of really, experiencing these positive outcomes. I guess, unchosen solitude, when it's kind of forced upon you and you move to a new city and you don't know people, or when your plans are canceled on a Friday night and you're sitting at home and wondering what everyone else is doing that's fun that you're not doing. Those kinds of experiences of unwanted solitude, if you're ostracized, if you're rejected, if you don't have friends to spend time with, those are going to make you feel the worst. And of course, COVID was a huge natural experiment where a lot of people were forced into unwanted solitude. And that, has the potential for a lot of people to feel lonely and socially isolated. And I guess there were these ideas and a lot of memes going around at the beginning of COVID that for introverts who do tend to, enjoy their time alone, that this was like heaven for them. And that this was like the perfect setup, so happy to have my real life now that I don't have to leave the house and I have to stay by, and there's a whole bunch of news headlines kind of, speculating that introverts are going to thrive under this new reality while we're all locked down. But in the end, of course, it wasn't true at all. And it was actually extroverts who ended up doing better over COVID, mostly because we think they have good coping strategies. They're more adaptive. They're able to change, their behaviors and responses to adapt to situations. They have a little bit more flexibility in how they behave and how they cope as compared to introverts. And that allowed them to do better, even though you might expect it to be the most difficult for extroverts to be spending all that time locked down. They were able to find ways to get their social needs satisfied, and ended up doing kind of better overall. I should also mention that during COVID, it also put a highlight on what happens if we get forced time with others. And you mentioned the term loneliness earlier, and I didn't get a chance to explain. So let me use this opportunity to talk about that. COVID was also a time when, imagine a young family, two parents and three young children who everybody's working at home, the kids are being educated at home, and you just never get a time to yourself. And you can imagine how that could be stressful. And just as it turns out, just by coincidence, a few years ago, we started studying this idea that it might be possible not only to get too much solitude, which everybody had sort of previously focused on, but it might also be possible to feel like you're not getting enough solitude. And we were really surprised that no one had really studied this before, and there wasn't even really a name for it in the English language to describe the negative feelings that might arise with the perception that you're not getting enough time alone. So we kind of linked it to loneliness. We kind of thought of it as like the mirror image of loneliness. So loneliness, as I said, is this discrepancy. You would like to spend more time with others, but you're not getting that time. So we thought, well, what happens if you would like to spend more time alone and you're not getting that time? And so we called it a loneliness as, again, kind of this mirror image. And in subsequent studies now, over a few years, it's become pretty clear that when people feel lonely, when they feel like they are craving more solitude, they feel more stressed, they feel more angry, they have increased symptoms of depression. It's like they're having some of their basic needs not met, just like when we don't get enough time with others. So it really seems that kind of, that's a real thing. And one of the things I always try to do is raise awareness around this, that it's okay, to ask for that time alone. It's okay to say to people, well, I'm not going to pretend I'm washing my hair so I don't have to go out on a Friday night. I'm just going to stay home and curl up with a book and have some nice me time, and that should be okay, right? It should be okay to say to a romantic partner, I love you, and it's great that we spend all this time together. I'm going to go, for a 2-hour walk now. See you later. I'm going to spend some alone time. That should also be okay. It doesn't mean that we have a problem with our relationship. It doesn't mean that I don't like you or that we don't like spending time together. It should be normalized that we should ask for that time alone, because if we don't get it, we end up feeling grumpy and we end up feeling stressed, and that can have real implications for our well-being.
Mhm. Can you talk about some of the negatives that happen if we don't get enough alone time or me time?
Yeah. So there's been a handful of studies that we have done in teenagers and in young adults, and it shows that loneliness actually correlates with the same kinds of things that loneliness does. So feelings of stress, feelings of anger, feelings of sadness and bad mood, and even symptoms of depression. And then it's been interesting because a few other researchers around the world kind of picked up on this idea. They were interested in measuring this construct, so they translated and used my measure and found some other interesting findings. So some researchers in Japan looked at loneliness in the workplace, and what they found is that when managers feel lonely, when they feel like they're not getting enough time by themselves, they end up taking it out on their workers, and they're more grumpy with them, and they have more harsh interactions with them. And in one of my favorite studies, some researchers in the US who study romantic relationships, they looked at what happens when one member of a romantic couple feels more lonely. And their experiment was fascinating. They actually had participants poke needles into a virtual voodoo doll. So on screen, there would be this picture of a voodoo doll. And the instructions they were told is, this voodoo doll represents your romantic partner. How many pins do you want to stick into this voodoo doll? And it's meant as kind of an indirect measure of how angry, or frustrated they were feeling with their romantic partner. And so the members of the romantic couple who felt more lonely, who felt like they weren't getting enough time alone, seems like they kind of blamed their romantic partner because they stuck more pins in the voodoo doll, as opposed to those who were not feeling that way. So again, it can have real world implications for relationships if you're not feeling that. And I guess I should say, one of the other benefits of solitude that we haven't talked about yet is that it seems like spending good quality time alone can actually help our relationships with others, right? Which seems kind of paradoxical. Like, you wouldn't expect being alone to help your, interactions with others and to help you be more sociable. But it turns out, and there's pretty good research to show it now, that when we get good time alone, our subsequent social interactions, the next time we interact with people, we tend to experience that more positively. We think it's more intimate. We think it's more enjoyable. And so when you want to tell your romantic partner, I need some alone time, you can say to them, this will be good for both of us, right? Because when we hang out later, I'm going to be in a better mood. We're going to get along better, and it's going to strengthen our relationship. So if you give me a little bit of me time, it's going to pay a lot of dividends.
Great. And that's a great segue into the segment that I call Our Readers Want to Know. So these are questions from our book club readers. And one of our readers wants to know how they can carve out more alone time if they're barely, getting everything that they need to do done. And so kind of getting that alone time almost feels like they feel guilty because they've got all these other things to do. Do you have any strategies or approaches on how even the busy person can get some alone time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure a very common problem, because lots of busy people around, we live busy lives. It's hard to squeeze in almost anything else. So I guess the first thing I would say is I definitely understand. People are really busy and it's very hard to carve these things in. And we prioritize a lot of other things. But one thing that we should also prioritize is spending some time alone. And it will help you do everything else better. So when you're thinking about how is it really so important for me to prioritize? One thing to remember is that it's going to improve your mood. It's going to make you experience your social interactions better. It's going to recharge your battery. You're going to be less stressed. You're going to, have the edge taken off of your negative emotions. And so it might make you be more efficient and do things more positively and even more quickly. So you might even save time on some of the other tasks that you have to do by taking that little bit of time for you. Okay. And this leads to another myth, I think, about solitude, is that most people think, well, to get the benefits, you have to take a 2-hour walk in the woods. And of course, that's not true either. It turns out, and there's been research to suggest, as little as 15 minutes a day actually seems to make a noticeable difference, and even predicts over time improvements in people's mood and in their well-being. And so 50 minutes doesn't feel like a huge ask, right? No matter how busy anybody is, I feel like it's not unreasonable to say, take 15 minutes, plan it into your schedule, and, take some time for yourself. Do something that you enjoy doing, that you find relaxing, that you find, leisurely and engaging, and, commit to it on a daily basis. And I'm willing to bet that you will notice a difference after as little as a week.
Amazing. Another reader kind of has the opposite problem, where they're finding they're spending too much time alone, and they're wondering, do you have any strategies on how they can reduce that amount of time alone to reconnect more with others?
Yeah. And it sounds like if they're feeling like they're spending too much time alone, then it's probably mostly unwanted solitude, which is as I mentioned before, something that can make you feel really bad. And so I guess I have two responses to that question. The first one is focusing on how can you improve your interactions with others and how can you find more ways to interact with others? And that should be the primary goal. If you feel like you are, if you're feeling lonely, that's your body, that's the alarm system going off saying you need to interact more with other people. We know that humans need social connection, and that's the alarm bell saying that you need more social connection. So it turns out even just being around other people and, talking to strangers can actually boost our mood and make us feel better. So again, just going out and being around other people, initiating a conversation with someone, we're actually really bad at predicting how that's going to go. People think initiating a conversation with a stranger is going to make you feel anxious. It's going to be awkward. It's right. But it turns out pretty much for everyone, even introverts, engaging in a conversation with a stranger, when we're done, it raises our mood. We feel better. We feel happier. So one suggestion is just engage in some micro social interactions. Go out to the coffee shop and have a conversation with the person who serves you your coffee or someone sitting next to you at the coffee shop. And of course, there are so many opportunities out there to engage in social interactions if you put yourself out there to do it. So join a club, join a walking club, join a book club, do some volunteering. There's so many organizations out there that could use people's help. And just by being around other people and doing something nice and altruistic, you'll feel better doubly by having done that. So there are lots of ways that you can connect with others, just by putting yourself out there and making the effort to do that. And I know it can feel self-conscious and maybe you feel like it's not going to be worth the trouble. But if you are feeling lonely, like I said, that's your body saying to you, I need to go and be around other people. So you have to make the conscious effort to do that and plan it out and put it into your schedule. So that's the long first part of the answer to the question. The second part of the answer to the question is, well, what happens if I'm still spending time alone that I don't really want and I'm not enjoying it very much? So it turns out it's actually not that hard to flip the script on our solitary time. So a lot of people don't enjoy spending time alone. They feel like it's boring. They feel like it's aversive. They'd much rather be doing many other things. But it turns out even just changing the way that you think about your time alone makes you experience it more positively. So this is a psychological phenomenon called cognitive reframing. It means flipping the switch. So some people think about solitude as a punishment. They think of it as something bad that they have to endure. Instead, just tell yourself, and literally it's just changing the way that you say to yourself what this is. Think of it as an opportunity. Think of it as a gift. In one study, students were just told to think happy thoughts while they were alone, and that improved their experiences of solitude. In another study, they read a paragraph on the benefits of solitude and understood that it could be helpful, and that improved their experiences of solitude. So I would say if your listener is listening to this podcast and is listening to us discuss the positive aspects of solitude, that might even help them the next time they have to spend time alone, because now they understand a little bit better that this can be an opportunity as opposed to a punishment.
Such great strategies. I'm just conscious of time. And I want to give you sort of your final thoughts on solitude.
Okay, final thoughts on solitude. I guess the most important message I would like readers to take away from this book is that we all need social connection, but we also all need solitude. And it's up to us to find that right balance, that perfect Goldilocks, just right amount of socializing and solitary time that will allow us to experience all of the best of both of those worlds.
Thank you so much. The book is The Joy of Solitude, How to Reconnect with Yourself in an Overconnected World by Dr. Robert Coplan. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks so much.